Okay, one of our panelists is still having a little trouble getting in, but I think we're going to go ahead and start. So let me start with a prayer. I'm going to say the prayer for social justice on page 823, and then I'm going to recite a little bit of the baptismal covenant. Let us pray. Grant, O God, that your holy and life-giving spirit may so move every human heart, and especially the hearts of the people of this land, that barriers which divide us may crumble, suspicions disappear, and hatreds cease, that our divisions being healed, we may live in justice and peace through Jesus Christ our Lord. Will you proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ? I will, with God's help. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? I will, with God's help. Will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I will, with God's help. Well, good morning and welcome to the forum this morning. Today we are going to follow up on our Sacred Ground series, which I think all of our groups have now finished. We had 10 groups over this past 10 months. Actually, 10 groups with over 110 people over the past 10 months that have done a deep dive into the history of race in this country, which, as I hope those of you who have participated found out, is not just the history of race in this country, it's the history of this country. So looking at that in more detail, at least for me, I learned a lot of things that I was not taught in school. And it was eye-opening for me in so many ways. And we're going to spend the first 20 or so minutes talking about the Sacred Ground journey and what we as a congregation have learned from it. And then the last 40 or so minutes, we're going to talk about what comes next. That's been a big question for many who are have been in the groups. Is sort of, now we've learned all this stuff. It's been a very eye-opening experience. But what difference does it make, so to speak? What can we do about it? How can we make a difference? The way the baptismal covenant that we just read calls us to do, to be a part of reconciliation, peace, and justice. So that's where we are. We're going to start today by, is Kathleen on yet?
I made it. I made it. I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay. So one of the things that that we did as part of Sacred Ground. How many of you, just by show of hands, I can't really see the hall, but how many of you by show of hands were in Sacred Ground? Many of you, about half of you maybe. Great. One of the things we're going to look at real quick is one of the final exercises that we did in Sacred Ground was reflect on what it meant. So we're going to start by reviewing that exercise. So this will be a compilation of the reflections of all the Sacred Ground groups from the cathedral into sort of a poem. And Kathleen, do you want to assign some different readers for this, or how would you like to do this?
Sure, Jeff. If you'd like to assign them, that'd probably be easier because I can't see everybody. But we have, I believe it's 4 slides, and each person should take a slide. I can take the first slide if you want. And
Okay.
then we all in unison say the last slide. Did you get the slides?
Yeah, I do have it. And unison doesn't work real well on
okay.
Zoom. So maybe if I can get, let me pick, Tonya, can I ask you to read slide 2? Okay. I think I see you nodding. And
Yes, I'll read slide 2.
Robbie, would you read slide 3? And let's see.
Yes, I will.
Stacy, would you read slide 4?
Sure.
Okay, and I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you. I'll start. St. Paul's Cathedral sacred ground is. Sacred ground is hard work, liberating, justice, the first step of a long journey. God's invitation to justice, looking back so we can change how we look forward. Love through the worst, loving others as you love yourself. Complicated, spirit-filled, meeting people where they are, painful and healing. Community, removing fear of the unknown, unveiling the illusions of the larger culture, accountability and restorative.
Sacred ground is a vehicle for identifying the harm that has been caused by genocide and slavery in our historical past and the effort to move past that into a world of acceptance and equity. A place to demonstrate to each person on the planet is beloved to God. Opens doors, opens minds, and opens hearts for healing. A safe place to speak your honest truths without fear of judgment. Forming small groups of people who commit to speak from the heart, yet yearn to be transformed and learn about past ancestors and families who are subjected to racial injustices. A journey which is transformative and life-changing. About learning and understanding the historical data presented of European colonization of the Americas, the racial injustices and horrific treatment of people of color from white people was unconscionable. A responsibility for every human being to re-examine their own actions of implicit biases and microaggressions towards others. A gathering of people who yearn to be transformed, who wish to learn about the stories, families, and ancestors of the past, and who listen to the experiences of those living in the present so we can stand in solidarity better with all in the future.
Sacred ground is where I commit to letting truth rule in my heart. A place to be broken open and confront the underlying history of America. An opening space to move into, to meet the other where he is and to repair. Is a confession where I'm honest with God, bare my soul and repent. A meeting place for our deeper selves. Powerful awakening toward the disenfranchised, where I meet God and I am broken open, where it's my soul and God. A window with no glass in which I can both look out and be looked at, by which it's possible to see and to be seen.
Sacred ground is opportunity to grow, respecting the dignity of every human being, the ground we stand on, graceful space for everyone, following our baptismal covenant, where we take off our sandals, walking the talk, just the beginning of what we can do with God's help. Invitation, another Moses moment. Are you talking to me? Working towards reconciliation with others. a way to get to know each other, a song we all want to sing.
Sacred ground is each of us. So now I want to invite, I just want to invite your own thoughts and reflections and experiences from sacred ground, either from what we just read or your own experience looking back now that we've been out of it for some of us for as much as a month, some of us for a week or two. What was this experience like for you? What do you want as we look back on this past year together? What did you learn? What do you hope for is coming next? What are your reflections on sacred ground?
I found it very educational, but very disturbing. Like you, I didn't learn about this in school. And so I found the revisionist history appalling. But I was also struck by the power of, the films. I mean, it was like Uncle Tom's Cabin or To Kill a Mockingbird. And I guess I'm left with the idea of when from the talk on Mormonism, was that last week? The need to interact with people who are outside our bubble. But to be able to do that in a way that's not, you can still be a peacemaker. Because at least in my experience, talking with people of different sentiments, it just doesn't, it ends up being a confrontation and not particularly helpful or fruitful. So I go back to the power of literature and stories. And I think that coming together, a way of common ground might be through sharing stories. In my own, what brought me into, got me interested in spirituality and religion was, I was taking at the public library when I was in high school and reading, Dostoevsky's The Grand Inquisitor. Now that's not one of my favorite books, but it sure stimulated a lot of discussion with a lot of different people. And you're forced to, be sort of intellectually hospitable and look at other people's views. So, going forward, I'd like to see more. I think that's, again, Emily Dickinson said, tell all the truth, but tell it with a slant. The truth, the truth will dazzle gradually, or else all men be blind. So I think trying to confront it is not going to be helpful and only polarize people, but coming together, I think through literature, discussions, and common ground would be the way forward.
Thank you, Barbara. So using story, the power of story to build bridges across our divides. Any other thoughts or reflections?
I think that that's a really powerful way to move forward. And it's also important to move forward with action as well. And everyone is at a different place regarding how to do that, what to do in terms of action. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Diane. Kathleen?
I felt it was very useful to have a collective consciousness on the subject. A lot of times you do the work, you do a reading and it's on your own, or you come across something, a microaggression or something, it's on your own. But this was a collective of not just the people in your group, but the people at this community, in this community. And I thought that was incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
Good morning. For me, it was a gut-wrenching enlightenment or awakening. And what I mean by that is the brutality, the inhumanity. It's absolutely shocking. But I think part of the shock is that from kindergarten to PhD, none of us have learned any of these facts. And my question is, how do we incorporate this into the school system? I remember taking classes in college on Black history, Native American history, Chicano history, women's history, but it was all separated. How do we get this into the classroom from kindergarten to PhD? I think we need to work on that. And above all, we need actions. Why do we need action? Because people are still being brutalized and killed, even in our generation. So we must act. And, you know, Jesus said that there are two kinds of sins, essentially, what we do and what we fail to do, and to treat others the way we want to be treated. Lastly, I'd like to share a couple of thoughts from one of our people in our group, Maureen. And I love what she said. She said it was humbling. And then she said, it's a beginning, not an ending, you know, the study of sacred ground. So thank you.
Thank you. Very, very beautifully said, Anita. And I really appreciate that the idea of education, you know, how incorporating and integrating curriculum so that these aren't, there's a history that's not, somebody else can probably say this better than I can, but that might be an action. Working on education reform might be one action that we could work on tangibly. And the need to not be complacent about that, at least in my view, is a call of the gospel. Because the downstream effect of letting Black history, gay history, women's history, Latino history be separate histories is that we all then live, we don't have a narrative that unites us in our experience of the suffering that's been perpetrated in American history, in US history. And so that's a call for justice, and we can't have peace without coming to terms with some of the terrors that have been perpetrated in the objective history of this country. So to me, that's a call of the gospel to work on an action like that, and that there might be other actions that we can come to. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of thing in just a minute. Any other thoughts or reflections? Agnes and then Robert.
Since we're talking about education, I'm not sure that in thinking about changing our education system, we should neglect church education and how we are educating our own children in our own space, and make sure that we are doing inclusive education in our church education, particularly with the children, where I had the good fortune of being able to send all of my children to Montessori school, where the emphasis starting at age 2 was in world education in about all the peoples in the world. And I had, you know, 2 and 3-year-olds who could name every single country in Africa, which I can't do. I couldn't do then, and I can't do now, but they could at 3 because of the education that they had. And I think we need to incorporate that into our religious education program so that they don't learn just about Western theology, Western religious education, that they have a more worldwide education in spirituality and the ways different people worship and express their love of God and their love for one another in ways that the Western church hasn't. And there are parts of the history of the Western church that are not something that we want to imitate or perpetuate. So I think that we should start with our own education system, maybe at the same time that we're talking about wider education, but start at home.
Thank you. So in what ways can our own Christian education and formation examine the history of imperialism and colonialism and decolonize itself, as some of the videos we looked at, the Christian complicity with the doctrine of discovery and some of those other oppressive aspects of Western Christianity. To what degree do we need to sort of mind our own house and our own affairs and clean up our own business? Thank you, Robert.
Well, I wasn't in Sacred Ground, but this is more of a question than a suggestion, but maybe both. To what I'm getting from this, that everybody talked about being receptive to the other and their plight in the history of the United States or the history of American colonization. And so when you talk to these people who are still angry about it, to what degree were you trained or shown to have them not only listen to the fact that you're listening to them, and so that something can go forward, so that it's not just a rant? Did that go on in any significant way in this program?
Well, anybody want to answer that? Or I will if nobody else wants to address it.
No, I can say something if you want.
Go ahead.
I think what you learn is how to hear and listen and be still and feel the moment together. Mm-hmm. As angry as somebody is, or as sorry as you are, or whatever the emotions are, you walk through them together. And that's not easy to do. Mm-hmm. And I think this was a safe space to do those things in. So I don't feel that there were so much rants as were opinions or their experiences or people's, just what they had to say. And the room gave you the room to speak it and people to feel it, absorb it, and move through it. And I guess that's the best way I can describe it.
Were there actually representatives of various groups who were victims of colonization and white oppression in any of these groups that were able to speak?
I
would say that it wasn't so much opinions as much as it was factual presentations of history. Uh-huh. And so by witnessing stories that for many of us were new, that we didn't learn, I didn't learn anyway. There weren't portrayals of I'm angry and you should be angry too, as much as it was the gradual revelation mm-hmm. of a history that for many of us had been untold. And that allowed me to be angry in a way that I previously hadn't been angry, because I didn't understand the depth to which our country was complicit in the sin of racism. So I don't think this was about an aggrieved party as much as it was about the building of a history that shows the depth of the integration of racism into our history and into our lives today in ways that it doesn't always get told, because we don't always take the time to do it slowly and carefully mm-hmm. in the way this curriculum did. That was my take on it, but what do others think? Diana.
I just want to say I really appreciate this opportunity to learn so many materials that I'm not familiar with. And also, as you point out, that many people point out, the depth, the serious issue in the DNA of this history. And I have some sort of, I don't know, 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 I have some sort of, I don't realization is that it's not just a personal journey that is part of that in the system, but also I feel that this learning is also awaken or recognize that we all have a prejudice. Doesn't matter of what's your racial background. One thing, just an observation, it's not a criticism that about curriculum. I think I learned so much from the readings, which I found is really part of the really that I'm looking forward is that I learned so much things in this. But I do notice the curriculum still a little bit short in terms of issue of Asian American Pacific Islanders, that part. And I think maybe, especially not very relevant this year, especially later part of this year, that maybe the Asian Americans or Asians or Pacific Islanders, they tend to be more silent in terms of certain things. So it's not very evident. So maybe there are much, I assume there's still a lot of materials out there. So if this is a program gonna re-implant, reopen in the future, perhaps I was hoping that that part of the element can be increased a little bit. But it's not a criticism, it's just observation.
I think I appreciate that. I hear you.
Yeah, because because it's a really wonderful experience. But for the forward, I think we tend to intellectualize the things. Yeah, and that part I definitely is not dismissing, but intellectually understanding situation is quite different from actually experience the situation.
I think that was my point too. If I were, let's say, an indigenous person, or even anybody who's not a white person, and I saw these groups going on, and they say, they're talking about me. I wonder if they'd like to have my opinion about how this can be helped or solved or changed or made better. And I guess that was my question about that I didn't state very well or ask very well, whether or not there were such people available to talk about their experience and how this Sacred Ground program could maybe mitigate what they've gone through.
I have two responses.
Sorry.
Excuse me. One of them is that I can only speak for our Sacred Ground group because that's the only one I'm aware of. But some concerns were reflected by individuals in our group who had a connection with an experience of people of color, or had some family member who was a person of color. Therefore, I guess you could say we were people of color, if that's how we define ourselves. I do. Some people didn't. The other thing I'm thinking is, not to cut off conversation, but that's a wonderful segue into Sacred Ground in Action, because you can only do so much in 10 sessions. Not that much was discussed about other people of color within the 10 sessions, Diana, as well. There's so much more to say. There's so much more, there's so many more stories to hear. At the same time, Sacred Ground in Action will move us forward. And it's only as effective as the people who will share and do the work. So I think you're right. It doesn't have to be an intellectual. I don't believe it was primarily even, but we want to move forward and be a church that is grounded in this information that we have. And now we want to know more. We want to do more. That's my impression.
But I'm not dismissing the intellectual. I'm sorry.
I want to stop for a minute because I think I appreciate all the energy around this. And what we want to do is pivot now. I think that's an excellent pivot point to talk to Diane's point, which is that we want to look to the future and to the next steps in this ministry. The Sacred Ground, I think, was a great starting point, and it was just that, a starting point. And I hope that you all benefited from it in your own formation around the subject of racism. It was intended as a launching point, as somebody said earlier. It's not the end point. As one of our facilitators kept saying, you don't graduate from Sacred Ground and get a certificate that says I'm done with racism now. It's an awakening, and it's designed for Episcopalians who are primarily white to begin a conversation with groups that are primarily white, so that we have to do our own work as white people and not rely on people of color to relate to us their traumas, re-traumatizing themselves in the process, but to do our own heavy lifting before we engage in those conversations across differences, and be in a position to be better equipped to do that work. And I hope that it's been effective at doing that. But what can we do next, now that we've finished, now that we've completed the first portion of this work, Sacred Ground, which is a part of the Episcopal Church's Becoming Beloved Community initiative of racial reconciliation? Well, many of our leaders in Sacred Ground got together and came up with a framework that we want to introduce today. And that framework looks like this. It's called Sacred Ground in Action. And it has a couple of different platforms. It has a steering committee, which is open to anyone. If you are interested in this work and you want to be a part of the leadership, please let me know, and we will get you involved in the steering committee who helps guide the work. This is a peace and justice committee, so it's not hierarchical. It's a guiding collaboration of leadership. And then there are sort of three columns of actions, because we heard a call for wanting to make this happen, very similar to Anita's call earlier. I want to see some change happen. How do I, now that I have this knowledge, how do I make a difference in moving forward? How do I engage with across divisions, and some of the other things that we've heard earlier in our conversation? We put our heads together and we devised three different groups of actions. One is a congregational group. How do we act and behave for change, work for change as a congregation? And we're going to do that in a couple of different ways. Sacred Ground was developed before the tumultuous and very high profile events of the last year. And so we want to work together as a congregation to engage in more current events of the past year. We'll have monthly town hall meetings that Robbie Ewell will lead to focus not only on what's happened in the last year, but how we are going to respond to them as a congregation. For example, our first meeting, which will be June 13th, Robbie will talk about in just a moment, I hope. But we'll talk at that meeting about George Floyd and policing and chokeholds, and how can our community make a difference in those very current and relevant issues in our common life, in our national life, and make a difference as a community. How can we partner with other organizations? Are we ready to partner with a congregation of color or other different kinds of organizations? What kind of work do we need to continue to do as a congregation? As one person said, let me see how I want to say this. We have to be ready for that work. And we have to be mindful that we know how to listen and not have a kind of I'm going to be very blunt here. In listening and doing my own listening, I'm very mindful that sometimes white people are very ready to go out and help communities of color. And so a partnership with a community of color, in asking people of color to do this work, that's not always helpful to a person of color. So what work do we need to do as a community that has some diversity, but is a primarily white community? What work do we need to do as a congregation before we're ready to do that work with communities of color? And the Episcopal Church has a racial justice audit that looks at systems at our institution and analyzes and asks hard questions of the Episcopal Church that we might be able to look at our own congregation and see what work there is to do. That's one area where we can work on action together. Another great example is the dean asked us to buy Lift Every Voice and Sing hymnals. How can we look at our own worship and not take anything away, but add diversity and add in some new hymnody? And the Lift Every Voice and Sing effort was a great success, and the congregation really stepped up for that. Another area is the educational component. We can launch more sacred ground circles as folks are ready. We can put new small groups together as people want to do new book studies. There's been a lot of interest in the book, the Cast book, and study movies with informative content. Kathleen and Jen are heading up this area, and they'll talk to you in just a minute about that. And another area is sort of what can you do today, sort of individual action. And we'll have and curate a long list of individual actions you can take that might consist of this list and might have different things. And anybody can submit things for consideration on this list. Again, Diane Lopez Hughes and Tonya Chavis are going to head up this area, and they're going to talk to you about that. So right now, with that, I'm going to invite Robbie to talk to us about the town halls and what he's planning for our congregational action efforts.
Thank you, Jeff. And hello, everybody. Well, you kind of covered it quite well, Jeff, already. Thank you. Great send up.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder, sorry.
No, actually it was perfect. And just want to let parties know that, yes, it's going to be the second Sunday of every month, beginning next week, the 13th, at 6 p.m. will be the town hall meetings. And I should tell you, these town hall meetings will not be just one person talking. We're going to actually pull from our own congregation panelists to also serve as we review topics that are literally happening at the moment as we speak. Things that are very pertinent to our sacred ground conversation, bring things really right up to the moment. And also, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to have some thoughtful review about what we can do about things here and now. So the town halls are intended to be interactive, at least initially with the panelists, and we probably will open up some minutes for a few questions from the audience. But also we'll review some current video captures of really salient material, things that are really important for us to see right now, and to also talk about systemic racism in a real sense. So the first one is going to cover the topic of policing, chokeholds, George Floyd, and police budgets. Those that will follow will be topics such as how to be an anti-racist, how to be an ally. We'll look also at the overall issue of hate crimes, and particularly how they are levied against select groups in our society, and maybe get to the reason as to why and why it functions the way it does, and why do they seem to crop up with such regularity. And so we'll have a number of lists, but really, quite frankly, and we'll probably make some adjustments depending on what happens in our nation as we go over the next 10 months. But frankly, the first one is going to deal with a very relatively hot topic, and one that many parties have formed some opinion on one way or the other. And that is the topic of policing and also addressing many of the atrocities that we have seen, and as Jeff has mentioned, over the last year in particular, but frankly, have been systemic and ongoing for a long time. Regarding also the opportunity to maybe partner with other institutions that have been addressing these very issues all along. I think, Jeff, you captured it very well, that in many ways we also address maybe acknowledging that this is not happening in a vacuum. And if we're coming to the table, it doesn't mean we've been the first to come to the table, nor does it mean that we have to lead once we're there. But it does, there may be some wonderful opportunities to partner with other congregations and other entities that have been working towards social justice. And finally, regarding the audit that's already been conducted by the Episcopalian Church, that audit is kind of revealing in many ways, and our hope would be that we'll have a window of opportunity to review it, at least on, if not on a super intense level, on least in terms of a summary finding, and then maybe turn the lens on ourselves to see how would we fare in such an audit. Not that we will conduct one, but we will discuss the implications of having of this audit and what it suggests about us. So that may be at least that's a quick overview of the 3 categories coming from the congressional tier of our Sacred Ground in Action.
Thank you, Robbie. And now we'll invite Jen and Kathleen to introduce us to the educational component.
Okay, hang on one second. Can you guys see that? Because I can't see anything.
Yeah,
Yep,
we can
okay,
see it.
great. Okay, great. So I get the boring part, but that's okay. And Jeff already did the great presentation of what we're going to be doing. So hopefully we'll have some people signing up, new people signing up for Sacred Ground. And we're looking about the time frame of maybe August like we did last year. And then we're going to look for some small group book studies because we want everybody to have a chance. Some people might be are looking for book studies. Some people want to do other actions. So we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to do what they want to do. And so hopefully we will have some people in different areas that will be able to facilitate a book study. We're looking to launch that sometime in July, so more to come. And then maybe once a month, we'll do a movie or a documentary from either PBS or something that might be going on during the nation that we want to take a look at, and then we'll have some discussions afterward. So we'll figure that out and we might even partner with other parishes too, so that we can get a good collaboration with each other and then have a better discussion with more people. And now I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Thanks, Jen. So one of the things Jen and I are going to be doing are going to be curating some of the educational resources. And so just to give you an example or some things to chew on for now until things keep moving and we get some of these larger group things together. We found some things such as movies like it's out on HBO Max right now called Exterminate All the Brutes. It's by Raoul Peck and it can be seen right now. It's a 4-part, 4-hour documentary, and Raoul Peck is also the filmmaker who brought us I Am Not Your Negro, the James Baldwin film. And so his perspective is very interesting, and it's an excellent dive into just the history of racism and humans in humanity to one another. Quite frankly, it's quite a lot, but it's very good. Also, the book that everybody's referring to, if you want to jump in on that before there's a book club, Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. There's also a workbook and that's all available online. many different platforms you can get that through. And then I wanted to share also, there's the Metropolitan Museum of Art's 2018 exhibition, History Refused to Die, Highlights from the Souls Grown Deep Foundation Gift. And if you go to the Met Museum website, we'll make sure that you can get that link maybe on our website. It's a wonderful exhibition of Southern artists of color, their perspectives, and everything from just a really great perspective of these people's exhibition of artworks that was donated to the museum and by this foundation, and really broadens the American story of art history and starts to do the work that they need to do in institutions like museums who tell a certain kind of story using a certain kind of Western cultural civilization history. And they're backing out of that and doing more of inclusionary conversations and getting everybody's American history up in there. So it's a very good thing. And we bought the book for the catalog, and we'll have that in the library if anybody wants to page through that. So it's something, again, if you want to come to church, you can come and see some things that you might not have seen before. And then lastly, it didn't make it on this slide, but I wanted to do something called like a field trip excursion. And the Noah Purfoy Outdoor Desert Art Museum in Joshua Tree, California. Noah Purfoy is an artist that's actually highlighted in this book from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He does outdoor sculpture, found object work, and has this foundation, has a museum out in the desert in Joshua Tree. So if there's something you want to do, get out there, get in nature, be amongst this person of color's compassion and compulsion to make art. This is something that you can do. And it might not be as heavy lifting as some of the work that we do in the group. So I'd like to try to keep putting forward this kind of thing, make those available online for self-discovery. And we'll do fresh things as we go along. So that's education.
Hey, Kathleen, can I also add too? Right now, going on right now on PBS, I just watched, it was 10 episodes. It's called The Underground Railroad. And that was very interesting and very hard to watch too, but it really tells a story that I was not even aware of. So that's available on PBS if you have it right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and now we will send it to Diane and Tonya on what you can do now.
Thank you. So we like to actually start off with a quote from Bishop Curry that we'd like to share with you as we introduce our third pillar, and actually to just keep this in mind as we're moving forward with our actions. We must continue until no human child of God is treated less than a child of God, until everybody is treated as God's somebody, until this world and our communities are beloved communities, where there's plenty good room for all of God's children, he said. This is our work. This is our task. This is our struggle. So in the third pillar of sacred ground and action, it leads us into actually taking action. And we need to bring forward our commitments into fruition. So as we evolve in our work as a ministry and a congregation, we'll be adding more specific ideas and links of actions that you can take as we're continuing this journey. Some of the actions that you can take are to challenge racism when you encounter it. So to speak up, you can support Black-owned businesses. We do have a list of Black-owned businesses across the country that we'll be providing to you. We'll be adding to that list, but love your input as well. And that'll be posted on the website. You can also get out the vote. Voting rights are being taken away. So being active and making sure that that doesn't happen, supporting legislation that to support that does not happen would be something that you could do. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Diane.
Sorry. We also talked about the importance of joining relevant organizations. Some of those would include the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP.org, which connects with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which has been very active in a lot of the prison reform and litigation that's going on, unfortunately, needs to go on regarding the treatment of particularly Black young men. There's also the Union of Black Episcopalians that we'll have a link to. Showing Up for Racial Justice is a local organization, and Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter as well. There's a National Police Accountability Project, the National Urban League, National Action Network, and Campaign Zero, which addresses police violence. So there are a lot of organizations that exist that can help us to be more mindful and supportive of the issues that are going on. You can contact elected officials. We'll have links to officials at all levels in local, county, state, and national. It's important to advocate for BIPOC individuals, Black, Indigenous, people of color, to become board members within private and nonprofit organizations in order to influence policy changes. It's not just at the governmental level, it's at the corporate level as well. We'll have a link to join the Episcopal Public Policy Network, which is linked to the Episcopal Church of the United States and also has a lot of important legislation that we can support, writing letters to our elected officials, and maybe even making office visits and sometimes even standing outside their offices to encourage their support. And that takes us to the next and last thing that we can do, I should say last but not least, the importance of prayer and considering participation in vigils, rallies, or other protests in collaboration with organizations that stand in solidarity with our BIPOC sisters and brothers and against the sin of racism. If you have anything to add, please contact Tonya or me, and you can find our contact information in Realm. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists and to all of you who are curating all of this important work and leading all of this important work. I think it was mentioned a few times, but I will mention again that we are working on a webpage that will hold and accumulate all of these resources for you that we hope to have ready to launch by our first town hall meeting on June 13th. So that is coming, and I hope will be a well-used resource as we try to assemble these many, many resources to help us mobilize to take action as that's what this is all for. So with that, I'll open the floor for any questions for anybody or comments. And we have a few minutes left, I think, for that.
Hey, Jeff, I wanted to just say also, it's not just the 6 of us that are on the steering committee. I wanted to say that Jasmine Kaiser is on the team. So is Reverend Richard Leaf. So is Reverend Andrew Green, just the People's Warden, Justin Lewis, and Martha Cortola so far. So if you see any of us too, you can also reach out to us. If you have any questions or concerns or whatever, and we're available. Thank you.
So yeah, I really commend you for all your efforts. One of the points that struck me in taking the sacred ground was how one of the rate limiting factors for moving into action is this idea of the concept of white privilege, that's got to be undercut before really action can take place. And certainly some thought may precede action, but like C.S. Lewis said, they're both two blades of the scissors. They both have to go together. I particularly in the reading group, I'd like to emphasize or put a plug for reading the classics too. you know, as Episcopalians, we want to respect tradition. Elizabeth Koenig has influenced me on the role of Frederick Douglass and the power of his writings. Certainly Martin Luther King in his letters from the Birmingham jail. I'm always trying to get Claudia Dixon to talk about the spirituality of Moby Dick. I was, you know, and there's actually a book out, Why Read Moby Dick? And there's a scene in there that's one of my favorite where the cook is lecturing to the big fish and how they shouldn't, you know, eat up the little fish, that they should allow the little fish to have access to resources and try to appeal to the noble nature of the big fish, which I think can really be a powerful concept. And so I would just encourage, you know, educating ourselves about some of the classics and the, particularly like the Black writers, I mean, who have been so eloquent in addressing these issues in the past.
Thank you, Barbara.
Don't remember the past, you're bound to repeat it, as Tonya said.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I saw the title of a book recently called White Rage. And I don't know who the author is, but it talks about every time African Americans move forward economically, you know, socially, whatever, there was this reaction of white rage to destroy their success. So it might be a book that we might want to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
I might just back up and say ouch. and I'll just say ouch. Anyway.
Can you say more about that, Diane?
Well, I'm a little nervous about Moby Dick and the big fish and the little fish. I'm sure there are some redeeming things in there, but maybe I misunderstood. But we're supposed to say ouch when we feel called to say ouch.
Yeah, I was just hoping you could say more about what made you feel ouched. That it was the Moby Dick.
Yeah, where nobody's a little fish. I mean, just.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks.
Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Sue, I think you had a question or comment.
Yes, I have for some years been donating to Southern Poverty Law Center, and they have an excellent series of videos which they made in particular to introduce the issues of racism to children. And those have been done primarily in the last year or two. And I think you can look at those on the website without being a member. And I might, they also do a lot of supporting of lawsuits and are involved in the voting rights, et cetera, litigations.
Okay, thank you. And I'm so grateful to all of your contributions for resources. So we will continue to compile those, and please send them to the column leads, and we will continue to build those resource lists and try to mobilize together. At least in my memory at the Cathedral, we haven't tried to do this kind of bold, action-oriented initiative, at least in some time. I know there was a big Prop 8 mobilization, however long ago that was, 10 or 15 years ago. So we'll try to continue learning as we go on how to mobilize a large number of people to take action and keep our energy up, which, as Diane, I think, said, will require a lot of prayer and a lot of encouragement from each other as we continue to work towards reconciliation and peace through justice and repairing the breach. I encourage you, if you haven't already reviewed the Becoming Beloved Community initiative from the Episcopal Church. To me, that's one of the best foundational documents from our faith on why this is important to our faith to be involved in this kind of action, and why we're called as Christians to care about not just intellectually, as I think has come up a few times, intellectually about repairing the breach of racism and the sin of racism, but actually making a difference in repairing the wrongs of the institutional and systemic fabric of racism that's woven into our lives. So I encourage that document to you as we continue to move forward on this together to help us move this initiative forward together in prayer and with God's help.
Jeff, can we provide that link?
Was there one more comment?
No, I was going to say, can we provide that link on our website?
Yeah, sorry, my desk is falling apart, so I'm just having a little problem here. Yes, we will put that on the Sacred Ground in Action website, and and I think that is a great idea, Jen. So help me remember, and we'll get that up there.
Okay, I'll send you an email. Thanks, everybody.
And as Stacy had to leave to go to church, but next week we'll have, as she said, Episcopal Community Services with our own Elizabeth Fitzsimons as a new executive director, and she will be highlighting what Episcopal Community Services does as we consider building our own outreach center. It's the first of several in our locus, so we can get ideas and see what we may think about the idea of building an outreach center in our own ministry portfolio. With that, I will see you in church in a few minutes. Thank you, everybody.